Welcome to the Italian Grape Geek podcast. Join us as we explore personal stories of travel and tasting with Italy's must-know grape varietals. Chart your own course with My Italian Grape Geek Journal, your personal tasting companion to accompany the series. Available now on Amazon. With thanks to Colangelo and Partners for their generous support with this project.
Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Cynthia Chaplin, and this is Voices. Every Wednesday, I will be sharing conversations with international wine industry professionals, discussing issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion through their personal experiences working in the field of wine. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and rate our show wherever you get your pods.
Hello, welcome to Voices. This is Cynthia Chaplin, and today I am so happy to have Bob Davidson with me. Bob is the wine training manager at Veraison, the educational arm of Berkmann Cellars in the UK, and he's focused on training and education to support Gen Z workforce, people born between 1997 and 2012, helping them to get into the wine industry and stay in the wine industry. So this is a topic very near and dear to my heart, Bob. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, real pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Well, let's get your sort of backstory a little bit here. You studied philosophy at uni, and then you went into PR. So what was the path from PR to Veraison? How did you get into wine?
Drinking, I'll be honest. It was drinking. There was a lot of sitting around with wine when I was at uni. But I've always kind of been interested in food and drink. And my mum was always very into homebrew. So we did lots of wine and beer and stuff when I was growing up. And I always kind of saw the fermentation side of it. So, you could say it's a winemaking background, but not a usual one.
Very cool. Very cool mum to have. I mean, was one of the homebrews where you were putting things in the airing cupboard?
It was exactly that. Yeah. I don't think I'd like the wine now, but it was interesting to see it happen. So I was always kind of interested in it. And then I was working in public relations for a couple of years, and then my friend started doing the Majestic graduate scheme, and then that seemed like a lot more fun than I was doing. So I went from a suit to a white van overnight, pretty much.
Perfect. Well, I think I have an English husband, and I think he got in a lot of trouble at boarding school for trying to ferment things in airing cupboards. So I know all about that. But yeah, so you moved on to Majestic. For those who are listening who don't know, it's a massive wine, spirits, alcoholic beverages retailer in the UK. And since then, your wine career has covered all kinds of areas. You know, you did retail, you did fundraising at the Drinks Trust, fine wine sales, wine writing, working for a wine magazine, and organizing for London Wine Fair. So how did you arrive, sort of land up at Berkmann Cellars, and how did you get involved in wine education?
Well, I was never really an educator. I just saw the job advertised and it sounded kind of interesting. I was not there at the beginning of Veraison as such, but I sold them their stand at London Wine Fair when they first came up with it, and I knew Clara quite well, who launched it, and then it seemed like a nice company to work for, an interesting project to get involved with. And so, no kind of education background. I just applied for the job and jumped in, and it's been interesting.
Yeah, that is so brilliant. For people who listen to me relatively frequently, I have 4 daughters and 2 stepsons, and I often say, if you don't ask, you don't get. People get sort of bogged down in I'm not qualified for this. If it sounds interesting, it's pretty likely that you've got some set of skills that are going to go into that job. So I am always very proud of people who apply for jobs that they've never done before, because that's the way to get ahead. So good on you.
But it was I quite liked the fact it was an education role, but it was also, they were quite heavily bent on the commercial aspect and the application of it. So rather than education for education's sake, there was like a kind of a sales point of it. And then, I'm quite like what we do as a job in the fact that you can see real tangible benefits with our customers and in what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I lived in the UK for 16 years, so I'm a big fan of Berkmann Cellars anyway. But part of what I do in my life now is also wine education for WSET and for Vinitaly International and Italian Wine Academy and things. So I'm super interested in what you're doing. Let's talk about Veraison. It's the educational program at Berkmann's, and you have done this on-trade education for almost a decade. But now Veraison's goal is to bring a new form of wine training to the on-trade with a bespoke approach for the next generation of hospitality staff, which is very, very interesting. We know we need to do this. And you've said, and I quote, "There's a whole generation of people working in hospitality who grew up through COVID and don't have that pub or going out culture, nor are they interested in learning about food and wine in the same way that people did a decade ago. Sometimes there are people who don't even know that wine is made from grapes, which is shocking, but I know it's true. We can't continue to assume knowledge that just isn't there." So this is, I think, all very, very true. So with that perspective in mind, how did you go about sculpting an education program that's really dedicated to Gen Z at Veraison?
Well, we didn't necessarily do it specifically to aim at Gen Z. I suppose let's step up a bit. So I'd never had an education job before, and I approach everything like I do in life by being a massive nerd. So I just want to look at all the possible best available evidence there is, and all the science.
I can relate to that.
So yeah, so I wanted to look at, what is the best method of teaching. So we employed a behavioral scientist to work on this with us. Realistically, the core of what we teach is the same as everyone else. Wine is fermented grape juice, but what's different is how we go about it. So I looked at the most effective training methods, and they are generally emotionally led. And then that just happens to be particularly effective for Gen Z. It's effective for everyone, but it particularly does work for Gen Z in terms of hospitality. And we've got to look at, 20-30% of them don't drink any alcohol at all. So how do you get them excited about wine? How do you get people excited about something that they're never even going to experience? You can't. But you can get them excited about the concept of service, and you can get them to feel what it's like as a customer. And that's how we approach things. So Gen Z particularly, they want to feel a certain amount of self-efficacy is the scientific term. They want to feel like they've got control over their job. They want to feel something like getting something out of it. And we give them that. We get them to build their own language around it. We get them to feel, from the point of view of the customer. So it wasn't necessarily that we went in looking specifically for Gen Z. It's just that happens to be, the way that we approach things happens to work particularly well for that generation. And also, realistically, they are the bread and butter of what we do.
It's so true. It's absolutely true. And we all know that, as you said, a lot of Gen Z isn't drinking alcohol right now, and numbers of, new people coming into wine drinking are going down. So, obviously COVID had a big impact on our wine industry as well for many reasons, financial, logistical, mental health, job security, how we sell and buy wine in general, sort of direct to customer versus hospitality. So now the pandemic has passed. We know that on trade, the sector dropped in what they were selling by 25%, especially, as I said, at the entry level, at new consumers coming in. And it's interesting, something else that you said, and I'm going to quote you a lot in this because I've been stalking you, as I always do. You pushed back. You pushed back against the perception that Gen Z has lost interest in wine. You said there's not a shift away from wine. There just isn't a shift towards it, which I really think is such an interesting and crucial point to understand. As you said, just because you don't drink it doesn't mean you can't relate to it or the history of it or the culture of it or be able to sell it. So how are you sort of addressing this? You said self-efficacy and building their own language and getting control. How are you training people? How does the Veraison system work and sort of shift their attention into wine, even if they're not drinking it?
We focus more on the concept of service. So it would be unethical to try to get people to drink alcohol if they don't. I think we all know that alcohol is pretty bad for you, but realistically,
we agree.
Yeah, but we can still get people to understand the concept of service and care about the concept of service and understand how important wine is as part of that. The example I usually give is there are plenty of front of house staff who are vegetarian, but they can still talk you through the steak menu. There's no reason that you have to be able to drink wine to really know about it, care about it, and understand its importance. So we get people to look at it from the point of view of the customer and understand the emotion that goes with going out and having a good meal. We do different kind of exercises one we've been doing quite recently with people is, I've been offering some chocolate out. And then halfway through the group, I get a better bar of chocolate out and say, "Oh, would you prefer the better one?" And then they realize what it's like to recommend a premium wine. They won't have ever experienced that for themselves. They'll never have gone out and bought a more expensive bottle of wine, but they do get their chocolates better. Then they can understand what that's like from the feeling of a customer. So
that's such a cool concept. That's a very cool concept.
So yeah, so this underpins everything we do. We don't go in trying to. I think the mistake that lots of the wine trade makes is that we need to educate to inspire people. Like, no. You need to inspire people, then you can educate them. So we make them care about the customer, care about the importance of service, understand how it feels when you go in and you've got someone who's like, oh, I don't know, or they just say house or whatever. Like, you realize how disappointing that is. Once they feel that, then they're like, oh, this is why this matters. And then they get the satisfaction of serving people. So it's not necessarily that we get them to, enjoy wine or like wine. It's great when that happens. And it does happen sometimes. And obviously we go in with different foods and we get them to pair things. We get them to try and get them to experience it. And there's a few of them who do get that Damascus moment. But realistically, it's much more important if they understand why wine is a really, really crucial part of their job.
Are you enjoying this podcast? Don't forget to visit our YouTube channel, Mama Jumbo Shrimp, for fascinating videos covering Stevie Kim and her travels across Italy and beyond, meeting winemakers, eating local foods, and taking in the scenery. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, that's a very, very cool concept. I think looking outside the box that way is so interesting. I've had wine students who don't drink, and they're just interested in the science and the history and the culture and sort of the whole concept behind it. So, but the chocolate idea is super interesting. You mentioned that you also brought in a behavioral scientist who I happen to know is Rachel Skews to help design the new courses. So what did she bring to the table? Why was her input so important to the program? Because I think there are not a lot of educational programs out there in the wine world that do this. And I think that this could be a really important step in the future of wine education. So what was Rachel's role?
So she came in to explain. Well, she helped design the exercises that we do with people and design the concept around things like co-creation, where a lot of programs will go in and explain and tell them what words to use for certain wines. We don't do that. We get them to build their own language around it. And that's totally different for each venue. And it's totally different for each group of people that you're training. But also that means that they get kind of a control and they can relate to it better. So I know one place we did recently, they described a Chardonnay as tasting like Werther's Original. Like, I wouldn't say that. But I was like, yeah, it does. Caramel, vanilla, fair enough. And that's their way. But then because they came up with that, they're much more likely to remember it, and they're much more likely to feel control and comfortable using it. So Rachel helped design the exercises we use and helped talk us through the most up-to-date science in terms of learning. There's a lot of programs out there that use totally out-of-date science, like learning styles. Learning styles were defunct 30 years ago. And yet there's still education programs that use VARC, Honey and Mumford and all that sort of stuff. And that's nonsense. It's like running something on Windows 95. Like, why would you do it? There's so much more up-to-date science and so much better technical stuff out there now that we can use. And I find it a bit weird that people aren't doing this already,
You are so singing my song. This is something that I think is really, really important, especially given the cost of a lot of wine education programs. It makes no sense to stay in this, just because it used to work doesn't mean it still does. So I love that. And I love the idea of letting them develop their own language, because language can be a huge barrier and really keep people out. That's something I've been fighting against for the past sort of 4 or 5 years. So the program now has got 3 parts. I love it. It's called Roots, Shoots, and Fruits. Fabulous names. So tell us, how does this work? And what's the goal behind the program? Now it's up and running. How many people are you training and supporting? What are the main features that you think are making it attractive, aside from this sort of concept of allowing people coming into the trade to develop their own style and their own language and sort of control of what they're doing? Do you have some hard data on success of people who are going through your program so far?
Yeah. So when I came in, there were about 6 or 8 modules for Veraison, and the content was great, but it was designed before COVID. So it was designed to be done between service. And that actually isn't the case anymore. There aren't big Fridays, etc. anymore. And then also there wasn't necessarily dedicated learning journey. So if you did one, what happens next? Was there an order to it? So we came in and we restructured it. Roots is the very basic one, and that is very much, this is a grape, wine is made from grapes. And quite often you'll get ones like, oh, I didn't know that. Or when did they put the oranges in and all that sort of kind of stuff. And we can laugh, but actually there's people out there who don't know that. And why would they? There's no reason for them to if they've never experienced it before. So Roots is the very basic one. And we explain, this is how wine's made. And this is kind of some of the flavors you can experience. And this is why it might happen. Then we do Shoots, which is much more focused on service. So there's, we talk about the science of food and wine matching. We talk about general service, and it's all pretty flexible. So it depends on if it's a gastropub or if it's a Michelin star place, obviously it'll be different. So that is quite flexible, but it's all based on service. And then Fruits is a full day course where we go through about 17 wines of the major wine styles around the world. We talk about some of sales psychology, working on a guy called Robert Cialdini, who's a professor, on his factors of influence. And we get, realistically, it might seem a bit alien, but actually if you get people to have a load of stock phrases and questions, it can really help them in their arsenal of service and help them premiumize people's experiences. So we get them to do a load of exercises around things that they might not have thought about. And then after Fruits, we've got I don't know about alumni, how you describe it. We're starting to design events for people after they've done that, for like sort of private tastings and other things. We want to keep that re-engagement. So we don't want to just go in and train them once. We want to keep them coming back and then learning a bit more and keep eager to learn for the next step without overloading them.
Right.
And then,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Carry on.
Oh, and then, and also earlier this year, we launched our first e-learning platform. So it's via an app called EdApp, and it uses a lot of the same psychology that Rachel's worked on. So she helped designing the app, and some of the exercises and quizzes and games in that are based on her work. And this is something that we're constantly building as well. So last year in person, we trained about 2,500 people, 2,600 I think it was off the top of my head. This year with the e-learning platform, we're aiming for about 20,000.
Wow, that's a huge goal. That's fantastic. I'm going to keep my eye on this. I'm very interested to see where you're going with this. You said you want to instill this passion for service and build a wine community and make sure people see this as a career and not just a stopgap job, which I really feel for. I think, in the UK and the US, people tend to view service jobs that way. In Italy, where I am, it's much more thought of as a lifetime career if you want it. So how's it going? Do you see a light bulb moment in your students? Do you see them actually go from Roots, Shoots, and Fruits and go into a career path where they're feeling happy about it and planning to stay?
For some of them, we don't want to force people through it if it's not their calling. But for those who do go through it and we do keep in contact with them, we do see them like keep in contact with us. They're keen to learn more. And realistically, they're going to be the bar managers, restaurant managers of the future. And then for those who don't, and for who it is a stopgap, at least we can give them, a bit more comfort in their job, like then give them a bit more control over it, a bit more enjoyment in it. So
sure, when you feel confident, you do a better job. You present yourself better and you present your product better. So there's an absolute direct correlation to that, whether you stay in that job or not. So knowledge is power, as they always say.
Absolutely, and it's an inclusivity point of view as well. So there's a lot of DIY stuff. They talk about, color or sexual orientation or gender or whatever. But I think things that get missed are things like cognitive ability. Some people just aren't as smart as others. So if you go in with loads of technical information, that just really alienates. Some people have different reading ages. Some people have just totally different life experiences. So I think what we do is much more inclusive for everyone that we go to, because they've got much more control over how it's, what they come out with, the language that we use. And it's much more flexible for each of the different groups that we go through.
This is why I love the sound of this program, because, people tend to ignore, things that are quite important, like socioeconomic differences and backgrounds. And, did you get to go to a fantastic school or a horrible school? All of these things really impact, who you are when you first start a job. So I think ignoring those, we do that at our peril. And I think it is part of DEI. I really do. So that's why I love this program. On the same topic, I know Rachel said that she's very focused on creating a psychologically safe space within the training environment. I agree with this. So I just wanted to ask you, what does this mean for you? How does this concept work at Veraison? How do you create, a psychologically safe space for doing training?
Well, there's a few ways. one is that we literally say verbatim, this is a safe space when we start them, and we get people to try to be creative. We do a kind of we cover it up as an icebreaker exercise, but we normally start by saying, "Oh, who here's been out for a nice meal somewhere?" And then normally someone has, and then we get them to talk about it, and then how does that make you feel? And then when it's one thing us going in and telling them what it's like, it's another thing hearing their peers talking about how it makes them feel, because it's they can really relate to it. So then they're invested. That's how we kind of start things off, and then we never tell people that they're wrong. We get them to we encourage them to be creative. We get them to try stuff out. We'll guide them. Like I've had some quite weird answers. One guy picked up the wine, sniffed it, was like, "Oh, it smells like my nan." And I was like, yeah, okay, fair enough. Probably don't say that to a customer. But there's, we don't tell anyone off it. We want to make sure that they feel comfortable talking about it. First of all, with each other, and then when they get comfortable talking about it with each other, they can talk about it with other people.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's really important in a classroom, that nobody is afraid to open their mouth and say something. And, a good educator can take that comment, this smells like my man. Okay, why? What kind of cologne does he wear? Does it have eucalyptus? Has it got wood notes, citrus notes? We can work with this. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's no wrong answer. I love that. So, before we go, how do you see Veraison going in the next few years? You've got a goal of training 20,000 people this year. That's a hell of a lot. What dreams have you got for the program? How are you going to keep up with Gen Z mindset and the next, Gen Alphas that are coming after? What do you see yourself doing with Veraison over the next couple of years?
Well, the e-learning platform's a big one. That's what we're really pushing at the moment, because realistically, they're a digital first generation. Like they look at stuff and they want to do things in short block learning, and it's how do we capture that attention for 5 or 10 minutes at a time? Maybe they're on the tube or whatever. So yeah, the e-learning platform is a massive push, and then a very core tenet of what we do is everything is based on the most up-to-date science. So we're constantly looking at new research that's coming out. We're constantly looking at what more exercises can we do, what other things can we do to make things more effective as training. And that's not just for Gen Z or the alphas coming out. That's for everyone. In theory, it's a feature, not a bug of what we do. It's the most effective training we can possibly do. So we are constantly looking at ways we can evolve, and also, without sounding too hubristic about it, I really hope that this is how training goes for everyone else. Now, I really think this is a pivotal moment for wine education. We need to start looking at much more effective training techniques. Everyone's looking at the content. They're worried about, should we do stuff on biodynamic wine? Should we do stuff on orange wines or whatever? Yeah, okay, that's important. But it's much more important to know about how you're training rather than what you're training. I think people really need to look at the methods they're using. They really need to look at jabbing up the exercises they're doing, and stop using outdated training techniques, because it's not really helping anyone.
That is incredible. I think you are bang on the money with that. I know that, we're looking at new things that we're developing on my end, and looking at things like gamification and all sorts of things, because as you said, the people who are doing training now are the digital generation. I know in my own family, my kids range in age from 24 to 32, and I think their head would combust if they didn't have a phone in their hand. So rather than fighting against that, I want to make use of that. So yeah, I think looking at how you train is super important. I like what you said about how you're doing it is almost more important than the content, which I think a lot of people would old school people would push back against that. But it's true. We have to catch their interest. We have to get them involved before we hit them with, all the heavy stuff. So I think this has been a really interesting conversation. One of the most interesting conversations I've had about wine education for a while. How do you feel about AI in wine education?
Well, so I think AI, as far as I understand it, it will only be copying what is already out there. So I think it's fine. When we do training in person, we get a number of the exercises, we get people to go and research the wines that we're talking about. So rather than just give them a load of notes that they have to read, it's much more impactful if they go and research something on the wine themselves. And then they might find something interesting that I didn't even know before. And then we do get them to use Google, we get them to use ChatGPT, we get them to use AI for things like that. So for a research point of view, I think it works. However, I don't think anything will ever replace that personal, emotional touch, which is, first and foremost of what we do. Everything is about, the feeling for the customer. So in terms of content, yeah, it's interesting. In terms of research, yeah, it's interesting. It definitely, with some of the e-learning stuff that we build, uses AI. Will it ever replace being in a room and discussing your feelings? Probably not.
That was the answer I wanted. So thank you for that. that was perfect. That was what I was hoping for. So, Bob, this has been great. I really appreciate your time. And I'm so happy to hear about Veraison. Next time I'm in the UK, I'm going to call in and visit you. Thanks so much for coming on today, and good luck in the future. I'm going to check back in and hear if you managed to train 20,000 people online in 2024. I'm excited for you.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And also, if you're around, please do come along to one of our sessions. I think it'd be really interesting for you to see what we do. It's, as I say, the content isn't that different. It's still fermented grape juice. Like whatever you spin it, it's still just going to be fermented grape juice. But I think some of the things we do are definitely more interactive and a little bit groundbreaking in terms of education.
Well, I am always up for learning something new. I am a total nerd myself. So anytime I can take a class, especially something innovative, I'm up for that. So I will be in touch with you next time I'm coming to the UK. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate talking to you today.
Oh, I've been delighted. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening, and remember to tune in next Wednesday when I'll be chatting with another fascinating guest. Italian Wine Podcast is among the leading wine podcasts in the world and the only one with a daily show. Tune in every day and discover all our different shows. You can find us at ItalianWinePodcast.com, SoundCloud, Spotify, Himalaya, or wherever you get your pods.